Joining us now is Republican strategist Joseph Pinion to help us break down the status of the 2020 race. Joseph, thank you very much for joining us tonight. So it looks like now it's a two-man race. Bernie Sanders was the frontrunner about a week ago. Now it's clear that Joe Biden is the frontrunner. With the schedule ahead, does Joe Biden pull away with this nomination?
Look, I think the schedule definitely benefits Vice President Biden. Obviously, when you look at the southern states coming up, particularly Florida being the big one, but in particular along that black belt, you have a strong African-American population that's going to be participating in those Democratic primaries, particularly older African-Americans who really cannot see past the false promises and empty wishes of somebody like Bernie Sanders because they've lived through an era of socialism. They've seen the ravages of what those empty promises mean for people who are the most vulnerable.
And Joseph, I think you're spot on for saying that, because when Bernie Sanders was the frontrunner, there were concerns from within the Democratic Party that having him on the top of the ticket could hurt Democrats in the Senate, House races down the ballot, especially when you get to the suburbs. Joe Biden does kind of ease those concerns a little bit, but he doesn't come without his own concerns for him. I mean, he has his gaffes, he has his kind of flip-flop record a little bit, but he's still a little bit more of a moderate centrist. Do you think that Joe Biden does pose a bigger threat to President Trump than a Bernie Sanders?
Look, I think both candidates have their independent strengths and weaknesses as it pertains to a juxtaposition with President Trump. You look at somebody like Bernie Sanders. I've always said the most dangerous force in American politics is a movement, because once a movement gets going, in many ways, the tail is wagging the dog. And his Bernie bros are a dedicated bunch of individuals that will follow him over the socialist cliff that he's trying to lead them to. So I think with somebody like Vice President Joe Biden, you have the strength in a place like Pennsylvania, in places across the Midwest, places we know that President Trump needs to do well: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. You're talking about 78,000 votes over 3 states, which was the margin in 2016. So I think, again, the president must be vigilant, making sure that we're taking both challenges seriously, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are talking about the future of this nation.
And I think this is a debate that's very interesting, because actually in the primaries in 2016, Bernie Sanders won Michigan. He, I believe, won Wisconsin too. And that kind of were major states that Hillary Clinton lost in the general election that, of course, launched President Trump into the White House. So when we're moving along to 2022, Joe Biden, to me, kind of matches up a little bit more with Hillary Clinton than he does Bernie Sanders. So there should be a little bit more concerns, too, about his candidacy in the Beltway states. Do you think, and not to mention, too, that a lot of Sanders supporters may not come out and vote for Joe Biden the same way that they didn't come out and vote for Hillary Clinton? Are these concerns that may arise again in 2020?
Well, look, I think, again, we are quick to forget that 10% of the people, based on exit polls, that voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016 primaries turned around and voted for President Trump. And so I think that is a big thing. I think that's also why you see President Trump being quite courteous to some of the Bernie Sanders supporters. And I think when you look at, the juxtaposition between Bernie Sanders and Vice President Joe Biden, one thing we're not talking about is that it reveals how disliked Hillary Clinton was. Yeah. Somebody who, again, couldn't find votes if they hit him on the head in Michigan. I think you look now at these 2020 numbers for Bernie. Yes, he's doing well in places like Maine, but not quite as well. Yes, he's doing well in places like Michigan, but not quite as well. So even the places where Bernie was quite strong in 2016, I think he's finally starting to understand that it's a lot harder being the other candidate when the person you're running against is not named Hillary Clinton.
I think you're absolutely right. In fact, on Super Tuesday, it showed me that when Bernie Sanders kind of thrived in 2016 in a lot of these states, it spoke more to an anti-Clinton sentiment than it actually did a pro-Bernie Sanders sentiment. And I think that's really important, too, because a lot of those voters stayed home in 2016. They didn't come out for Hillary Clinton. And there should be those concerns about Joe Biden as well, because, I mean, he's kind of come out with a lot of gaffes. He's a continuation of the Obama administration that a lot of people would say was rejected in 2016 in those states. So moving ahead, too, who Joe Biden picks as vice president, I think, is very interesting. There's been Hillary Clinton kind of tossed in there as a name. Senator Elizabeth Warren is now being kind of tossed around as a name. But then you hear the Trump administration, too. There's reports that they're looking to shake up positions, too. Does the vice president, whoever's on that ticket, play a role in 2020, or will this come down to the presidential candidates themselves?
Look, I think really at the end of the day, people vote the top of the ticket. I will say that in a close election, if it is Joe Biden, who he picks as the VP will be crucial. Does he give in to the hordes and pick somebody like a Stacey Abrams, who really does nothing from an electoral standpoint, but certainly from an identity politics standpoint? Or does he go with somebody a little bit more centrist, somebody like an Amy Klobuchar, who would realistically, be able to probably lock in a place like Minnesota, which narrows President Trump's pathway to victory. I think those are the practical decisions that we're going to have to see. As far as the Republicans, I think that Vice President Pence has done a great job. Obviously, he has tremendous support with evangelicals, which are a crucial part of the GOP base. So I think those are the things that are important. And I think, all this notion about a Nikki Haley, I think she's a tremendous leader. But ultimately, she wants to be president 4 years from now. And I think that, George H.W. Bush is the only sitting vice president that's ever been elected president in the last over 100 years. So I think she's happy where she is. I think President Trump is happy with Vice President Pence exactly where he is. And I think the GOP is positioned right now with Dems in disarray to really do some damage in November and pop some champagne.
Yeah, I think if you're a Republican, you're thinking at this point, if it's not broken, why fix it? It worked in 2016. Why not put it out there again with the record as well? But Joseph, thank you very much for joining us tonight.